Hello all. A quick hello. My name's Matt Fleury. In terms of structure for today, I'm going to run very quickly through who I am. I'm going to pose you a couple of questions to you. I'm going to give you some thoughts of mine around what I think are some myths and some truths around behaviour at work. I'm going to talk a little bit about the detail of the benefits of understanding your own and others' behaviour. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm doing about it, give you some parting advice, and then we'll have some time at the end, I'm sure, for a couple of questions if you've got some. So first of all, who am I? I am living in St Albans, father of 3 teenage kids, 2 rescue dogs. As I was saying to Alan before, I'm a business psychologist, but I've spent a fair amount of time in talent roles. So I'm an ex-head of resourcing, ex-head of talent, ex-head of L&D, and I even had responsibility for HR operations for about 12 months for my sins. And I've worked for a bunch of fairly well-known organisations. I won't list them out. And for about 18 months, I've actually been working on my own. I have a small two-person band limited company. I offer talent and behavioural advisory and consulting work support. So 2 questions I've got for you. The first one, I'd like you just to have a think about for 30 seconds. What do the following have in common? So keeping R, the reproduction number that we're hearing a lot about in the context of COVID-19. So keeping that below 1 in a future normal world of work, reducing obesity levels in the UK, driving digital transformation across UK PLC, and continuously improving candidate experience in your organisation. What do they have in common? Well, I'll give you my answer to that, or one answer. They're all complex problems with no easy answer, and they all require large-scale behaviour change. Another thing that's true, which we'll come on to a bit later on, is they require some discomfort or inconvenience in the moment for a perceived future benefit. And a lot of change is like that, if you think about it. A lot of what we're asked to do at work to change involves some discomfort or some inconvenience for us in the moment, but often the payback for that isn't until later on down the line. So as it says on the slide, whereas we've become used to as a society, buy now, pay later, an awful lot of change in behaviour is around pay now, buy later. And we struggle with that. So question number 2, if the core purpose of leadership is to improve team performance and or make team transformation happen, and I'm not sure you can call yourself a leader if you're not responsible for either of those two, and if behaviour change is a prerequisite to achieve either, and I'm not sure, I'd welcome any examples anyone's got of achieving those 2 things whilst not changing behaviour, that is, doing things exactly as you've always done them. But if both those things are true, why do so few organisations and leaders attempt to understand how behaviour actually works? I think that's the killer question. And I also think, well, I will be talking about that for the next 15 minutes or so. So if you're now realising that you've come to the wrong session and that doesn't interest you, that question, now's a good time to go and make a cup of tea and then come back in 15 minutes. But hopefully that's an interesting question and you are keen to hear a little bit more about it. So this is what I've come to believe from the 15 or so years that I've been doing psychology in the workplace. People can see that screen now. So the question really is, why do so few organisations and leaders attempt to understand how behaviour actually works? So this is what I've come to believe. So leaders can only really understand it, be truly effective when they understand, firstly, how their own behaviour works, and secondly, how they understand, if they understand how other people's behaviour works. So I call that the human behavioural operating system. And I've come to believe also that most people don't really understand even their own behaviour at work. And because of that, they really struggle to understand other people's behaviour. Now, I'll go on and talk about that in a second, but essentially I think that my sense is that people are either unaware of or they're really scared of the mess in the middle. And we really need to help people better understand that. So in summary, I think there's an urgent need to help leaders better understand their own behaviour and other people's behaviour at work. Now, when it comes to understanding your own behaviour, let me just make give an example of that. So lots of us will have a New Year's resolution, a fairly vague one, where we'll say something like, I will get fit this year, and that will lead to me to a future fitter self. And then if someone asks me, well, why do you think you're going to achieve that? Why are you confident you're going to do it? You'd say something like, well, I'm motivated. I want to be fitter. I'm in control of my own behavior ultimately, and I will use my willpower to make sure that I get fitter this year. And then I think that what that ignores is absolutely the mess in the middle. And as we know, or certainly I know, and I'm assuming that some people on the Zoom call know, it's unlikely that your aspirations or your plans are fully implemented, fully met. If we unpack that a little bit, I think that without getting overly philosophical, the issue is that there are actually three people involved in this conversation, three selves, if you like. And the person who makes the resolution is not the person that's actually doing the doing in the moment, and then in due course is not the same person as the one looking back and reflecting on what happened. So I talk about the intentional self, who probably has the job title Director of Naive Optimism, because they haven't got a detailed plan, they just have a vague aspiration, and they say, yep, I'm really confident I'll get fit. Now what happens is in the moment, the in the moment self is the one who is actually choosing what behaviours to do, what behaviours not to do, day in, day out, hour in, hour out. And the truth about the in the moment self is they are a short-term focused cost benefit machine. So they will be making decisions about costs of doing something right now and benefits of doing something right now. And as I mentioned before, lots of changes very much around pay now, buy later. So we achieve it, we do something now, we don't feel the benefit until the future. And so lots of times in the moment, we will choose to do the thing that we want to do, not the thing that we know we should do. So my little example there, you know, I could go for a run or I could sit and have a glass of wine. The reality is I feel like I've had a stressful day. In the moment, I deserve the treat, and that's what I'm going to do. Now that's understandable, but the further issue is, or the problem, when we look back on what happened, either later on in the week or 6 months down the line when we're struggling with our New Year's resolution, there are two reflective selves. You might call those the heads of regret and self-justification. So we flip-flop between actually a bit of sort of disappointment in ourselves that we're not achieving our goals or achieving the behavior change, or we're really good at self-justification as well. So we will no doubt have an explanation for why it wasn't our fault. You know, we've been very stressed, it's been very difficult, it's perfectly understandable that we didn't achieve our goals. Now, when it comes to understanding others' behavior, it's a reasonably similar challenge. So the example I used here, because I wanted it to make sense to folk that were on the call, and also because it's certainly something that I've lived in the past, is when you realize that you need to run an interview skills workshop to, for example, reduce bias in decision making or improve the candidate experience, and you tell yourself quite naively in the moment, or very positively if you like, people will attend, they'll fully participate, it will go great, and generally the standard of interviewing will go up in my organization. And then if people ask you, well, what makes you confident that it's going to work? You say, well, I'm sending out a really clear email to launch the initiative and explain exactly why this needs to be, you know, what needs to be done and what people need to do. I've managed to get my big boss, the HR director, to send a follow-up note to explain why and provide that necessary push, that necessary motivation. And I'm going to make it really clear to people that I'm tracking and following up activity to make sure that people are complying. Now, on the face of it, that looks fairly straightforward, but I would argue it ignores the whole mess in the middle of human behavior. So again, let's assume that now this is not us, this is one of the line managers that we would like to attend the workshop. So let's assume that he receives the email and with his intentional self, he says, yep, that's great. I intend to go on those workshops. They sound really interesting. I'm sure I'll find time and I'm sure they'll be really good. Now, in the moment, so that is the moment at which he actually comes to put his name down for a specific workshop, or perhaps at the beginning of the week looks at his diary, notices that he's due to go to a workshop and is considering whether he's actually going to attend or not. There are lots of messy questions that he will be asking himself that will go unnoticed by people around him. So he'll ask questions like, how does this fit with my self-image? So is going on training like this or a workshop like this something that people like me do? Will I look stupid? Will I be exposed? Will there really be value in it for people like me? What will happen if I attend? But more importantly, what will the implications be if I don't attend? And actually, how will attending affect my status? You know, we really care about how other people view us. We care about status at work, and we ask ourselves that question in lots of our cost-benefit analyses in the moment. And then quite apart from anything else, you know, there are questions around, will they have time to attend? Will they have discipline to attend? Will they be able to attend? And then again, this is again the line manager looking back at the end of the week or at their performance review time, either being really cross with themselves that they didn't end up attending if they didn't attend, or again, being great self-justification machines, having what they perceive as being really good reasons for not behaving in a certain way. So I just want to move on now slightly to talk about, to highlight a few myths that I think there are about behaviour that hopefully have come out in those examples. So the first is behaviour is a question of common sense, okay? The myth is if I'm a leader, I'm a person, I know how I behave, therefore everyone is pretty much like me, it's an issue of common sense. It's not, it's a myth. Behavior is really simple. It's really seductive to think that behavior is a question of just clarity and motivation and capability, because then you can tell yourself, all I have to do is communicate really clearly. I have to engage people to motivate them and tell them why. And then I have to put them through some training and make sure they have the capability to do something. Those three are important, but it is more complex than that. Another myth at the other end of the scale is people are unfathomably, impossibly complex, and it's just about impossible to predict how they'll behave, so what's the point in trying? And then the fourth myth I call out is behavior is essentially all about willpower. It's about moral fiber, and good, solid, stand-up folk can decide to do something and then just go and do it. Those four are all myths. Now, some truths to replace that. So forget common sense, but don't forget context. Human behavior is wonderfully complex and messy, but context is so important. Silicon Valley, this is a key one. Silicon Valley success shows it's not impossible or entirely unpredictable. It's not impossible to predict human behavior, that is. So if you look at organizations such as Facebook, they are fantastic at understanding the mechanisms that play to our fear of missing out, for example, and our habitual selves. So they will keep dragging us back in to consume more and more content. Similarly with Amazon, for example, Amazon and the one-click mechanism and the recommendations mechanism, that's born of real behavioral insight around the fact that if you want to make a behavior more likely, make it really easy and remove friction. And if you want to play on sort of fear of missing out and social proof, talk about recommendations and say, people like you normally bought books like this. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of our behavior is habitual. So experiments and research have shown that we are on autopilot, not fully conscious, for between 1/3 and 1/2 of the time that we're awake. Another truth, hacking the context in advance is usually a better strategy than relying on willpower in the moment. And I'll talk about that again in a second. And then the final thing, which I touched on before, we really care about what other people think of us. And we'd usually rather fit in than be the best that we could be at our jobs. So if I just try and bring that together and make that make sense for the two examples I gave before, so better understanding your own behaviour to improve your chance of success around your New Year's resolution. Firstly, make it specific and make it behavioural. So for example, I am not going to drink alcohol at home during the week, and I am going to go for a run for 2 mornings a week for on Tuesday and Thursday. So specific and behavioural, not focusing on outcomes, not focusing on fitness measures. So change the environment, hack the environment, make it easier to for good behaviours to happen and harder for bad behaviours to happen. So for example, make good behaviours easier. If you plan on going for a run, then get all your running gear together in the morning, in the evening beforehand. Put it in the bathroom so you're all ready to go as soon as you get up in the morning. It's easier, there's less friction. And make bad behaviours hard. Well, if you've committed that you're not going to drink alcohol at home between Monday and Friday, then don't have any wine at home, for example, because then there's nothing to stop you going out to the supermarket or bringing something in on the way home, but it just makes those behaviours that little bit more difficult. So start small. Be consistent, get into a routine. It's more important to get going and have 2 10-minute runs a week than try a 45-minute run, find yourself in pain, sprain something, and then don't go back to it for a month's time because you don't get into that routine. Other people can help to hold you accountable. So either family members, or what I think is a really good idea is a commitment buddy. So if 2 of you are trying to change your behavior or stick to a regime, work with someone and commit with them that you are going to share progress and perhaps agree some penalties if you don't stick to your intentions. Make it more enjoyable in the moment. Goes back to that point around, pain now for jam tomorrow. Actually, what can you do to make the experience more enjoyable in the moment? So you might not have any wine in the house, but why don't you buy a really nice bottle of fruit juice to just carry on that habit of having something nice to drink when you're watching television, and just make it that little bit more enjoyable than not having anything to do with your hands while you're watching TV. Or if you're going to start running, don't run around in old, unflattering running stuff. Just go out and buy a new t-shirt and some running things that you feel a little bit better about yourself going for a run in the moment. And then finally maintain momentum. If you fall off the wagon today, don't then spend a week worrying about it. Redouble your efforts to get back on tomorrow. Right, and then so better understanding others' behaviours can improve your chance of success. So if I go back to that example of the interview skills program, understanding some real core drivers of human behaviour can actually help you come up with some ideas and suggestions to help people do what you need them to do and what is also good for them. So you can perhaps make it easy for them to sign up by pre-booking them into sessions. I mean, obviously you've got to tell them that you've done that, but making it so that actually if they don't want to go or they can't make those dates, they have to select out rather than making them select in. Make it difficult for them to do the wrong thing. So if you can get them to make a public commitment about what they're going to do, that's more likely, they're then more likely to do it. And ultimately, you can link attendance to these sessions to other outcomes. So you can start to reduce or remove access to certain systems if they're not attending some of the workshops that they need to. Obviously, making it a pleasant experience. So really focusing on the colleague experience in the workshops and just making it fun and making it enjoyable and giving it that reputation. And then finally, and really importantly, remember that we're social animals and we really care about what other people are doing and status. So get some senior people and some high potential people as early adopters, get them actually walking the walk and not just talking the talk. Recognize and celebrate positive behavior, you know, posts on social media, social channels about people really standing up and being early adopters and taking important stuff seriously. And then as well, once you get up and running, you can use social proof and you can use fear of missing out to really create a bandwagon and start to really drive behavior. So nearly out of time, but I just want to then go back from some of that sort of stuff that I've blasted at you to say, well, if I believe so strongly that there really does need to be a transformation around behavioural understanding at work, the obvious question is, well, what am I doing about it? And the answer is, I'm researching and talking about it a lot at the moment, alongside some more what you might call sort of vanilla talent work that I'm doing. I'm really trying to build connections and bridges between people doing talent management, people doing leadership development, and behavioural scientists. And I personally am working with a well-known, very experienced behavioural practitioner to create and launch some simple, robust diagnostic frameworks, some methodologies and some tools and some learning products, because I'm absolutely passionate about helping leaders to robustly and ethically apply this stuff to benefit their people. And then ultimately that's going to benefit customers and it's going to benefit shareholders. So parting advice for you before questions. If you're interested in this stuff and you want to know more about it and you want to go on that journey, the first thing to do is accept that you probably don't understand human behavior as well as you could, or as well as you think you might. There are some fantastic books that are available in the space, loads and loads. There's just 5 I've put up on the screen that I absolutely adore. I think they're super interesting sort of background reading to better understand why we behave as we do. I think you can start actively looking at things through a behavioural lens. So what's the actual behaviour I'm focusing on, and what are the things that might be contributing to it, and what are the things that might be restraining it? What might be holding it back? Now, I think what's really important is having some sort of framework against which to ask those questions. Now, there are some diagnostic frameworks out in the world. I think there need to be some more that are simple enough to use every day and really holistic and informed by research and practice. I haven't gone through any today in the time available, but if people are interested, I'm happy to kind of point you in the direction of some specific frameworks that are out in the world that might be of interest. With all of this stuff, having an experimental mindset is really important. So if you come up with some ideas about what might lead to behaviors either in yourself or in other people that are desirable, then test those out, learn and adapt. So start small on these things rather than jumping in and committing a lot of time and a lot of budget in a silo. And then really importantly, those last 2 go together. Don't do to people. So this is not about manipulating others to get them to do what you want them to do. It is about working with people to understand how to help them get to do what they want and need to do. You know, and that final bullet point, and I feel so passionate about it. This is, I think, quite powerful stuff actually once you get into it, because it is starting to understand the human behavioural operating system, and you should always approach it with the best of intentions, with transparency and ethically. And I guess that was pretty much all I wanted to say. I rushed through some fairly busy, shonky slides, but I'm super happy now if anyone's got any questions.
Hello, Matt. I'm back.
Hello.
Would you mind just unsharing your screen for a second?
Unsharing?
Yeah, if we could, just so we're... There we go.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. That was really interesting. And you made me feel smart at the end as well, because I'd read the books by Dan Ariely and Daniel Kahneman. And the Daniel Kahneman one introduced me to the concept, I think, from memory, of the invisible gorilla, and about the need to pay attention, etc. And
Yeah.
really, really interesting stuff.
Good.
I've got a question for you myself. So
Mm.
when you're talking to business or HR or TA leaders,
Yeah.
how many of them fall into these three camps? The ones that get it, absolutely, and understand it. The ones at the other end of the scale who think it's witchcraft and just
Yeah.
really do not understand it. And
Yeah.
people who sit in the middle, who think they get it, but don't really know how to tap into that world and start to leverage it for business success.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, like in most things, it's a bit of a normal distribution curve.
Okay.
I think, by definition, people working in talent acquisition or people working in HR will have some understanding of what makes people tick. You won't get very far in HR or in
No.
talent acquisition if you are not at all interested in what makes people tick. I think the problem that lots of people fall into is they're interested in it, but they think it is either extremely simple,
Okay.
or they think it's unfathomably difficult.
So on your myth piece, right, they're at either end of that scale. They're either
Yeah.
it's really easy, I get it, I can nail this,
Yeah.
or Jesus, that's just a science that I can't even get my head around.
Exactly right. And I guess what I'm sort of advocating is, look, it is complex because people are complex.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we can't look at it in a way that's as simple as possible, but not too simple, to get some meaningful diagnostics, some meaningful hypotheses that we can go off and test. And I think that you can't, I feel so passionate that the Silicon Valley organizations, they understand how human behavior works, right? That's how they're building their businesses.
Yeah.
And if they understand how we work, there's really no excuse for us not to understand how we work.
Do you think there's also a risk that those businesses are also, perhaps because they understand how we work so well, that they're shaping how we'll work in the future?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's this massive issue at the moment, isn't there, around deep work and around distraction. And I'm as guilty as anyone at getting distracted. Now, the trouble is, you have this tension between the fact that we tell ourselves that we're going to focus on something for a period of time. We're going to focus on a big, gnarly problem, and we're going to rely on willpower, right?
Yeah.
Classic example. I'm just going to have the phone there, but I just won't look at it. Now, the reality is that there are boffins in Silicon Valley that have specifically designed that machine to be addictive. They have specifically designed it to grab your attention. So, they've done that with a strategy and a plan. Now, if you don't have a strategy and a plan to manage your own behavior, you're going to fail every single time.
It goes back to making it difficult to do those bad behaviours, doesn't it?
Exactly
bad behaviour
right.
being the desperate need to look at a cat dancing on a piano, or whatever it might be.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So there's apps you can have that turn your phone off for a period of time, don't allow you to see certain things, but just even simple things like have it in a different room. Don't have it on the desk next to you when you're working. If it rings and it's convenient, you can get up and go and answer the call if anyone gets phone calls anymore. But if not, actually, you have much more control of your context, of your environment, because you won't have the willpower in the moment.
Absolutely. I think my willpower is almost zero. So I have to have all of those controls in place, and to stop me eating the cupboard full of sweets or emptying the wine rack or whatever it might be. But don't have any wine in is a brilliant one.
Yeah. What's interesting, Alan, is we sort of, I get the sense that because of books like Predictably Irrational and some of the other books that were on my slide, I think we're starting to get some of this stuff in a personal context. We're starting to think about it ourselves. What I don't think has happened yet is actually moving into organizational contexts where, let's be really clear. If you're a leader, you are responsible not only for your own behavior and outcomes, but you're responsible for other people's behavior and outcomes. But it seems to me, or I've seen very few examples of where leaders are saying, I want to apply some of the same hacks, for want of a better word, to my own personal effectiveness that I might be using, as you've just explained. But I wonder what the value is of bringing that into the workplace, and I wonder how I can apply that robustly, so with a bit of science, so I'm not making it up as I go along, but also ethically.
Absolutely. Excellent. We if anybody's got any questions from the audience, and now is the time to ask these, by the way. One question again, another one from me, I could talk to you about this all day, by the way, as you can say, I'm reasonably interested in it, having read those couple of books. But you used an example there of getting people to go through interview training, for example. And I really like the different kind of almost interventions along the way there to encourage that positive behaviour. How have you got any real life examples of where you've seen people implementing that kind of approach to affect change?
In an organisational context?
Yeah.
So I mean, I've done it myself where we put in a 360 tool.
Yeah.
In an organisation I worked at. And so we very much went through that process as well. So it was a question of, how do we make it, the design of the thing's got to be really easy. Okay, sounds obvious, but it's got to be really easy. It's got to be intuitive. You can't expect people to look at training materials for it. It's got to be like most good apps. It's got to work just intuitively. It's got to be on your phone, because we know that this phone is always in our hand. You've got to make the use of it high status, right? So you've got to get senior and high status people using it and talking about it openly. So and so all these little hacks, and we did that, and actually we launched this 360 tool, and it launched just really beautifully, and we rolled it out globally using some of those kind of key insights really around just nudging people towards the right behaviors.
And what are the benefits to doing stuff that nudges people to do those right behaviors versus mandating certain activity?
Nicer, cheaper, easier to experiment. If you send a big note out saying thou shalt do X, and people aren't doing it, well, what do you do then?
What's your next course of action?
Sure to put everyone on performance management. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think you do have to be clear what's expected. Yeah. And I think there are times when sometimes you do have to mandate stuff. But I think what you start to do then, you hear lots in organizations about parent-child cultures. And I think the more that you legislate and thou shalt do X, the more actually you are propagating a parent-child culture, which very few leaders would say they wanted.
No, they don't. It doesn't lead to creativity. It doesn't lead to freedom of thought, innovation, etc. If you start to act it like that. And it was just interesting to know, what does one work better over the other? But I think the combination of the two, when it's absolutely necessary, it's a fact. If it's got to be done, it's got to be done. But you can still encourage that to happen through encouraging the right behaviours.
Yes, exactly right.
Okay, excellent.